You're watching Around the World, our top global stories. As the countdown begins to the completion of 1 year to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Just over a week to go and Russia's strikes on Ukraine continue unabated. In the early hour airstrikes on Thursday, a critical infrastructure object was hit in the Lviv region. However, there were no casualties that were reported. Air raid sirens sounded in cities and towns across Ukraine. Six aerial targets were spotted over Kiev during an air alert, though most were shot down. Russian forces are mounting round-the-clock attacks on Ukrainian positions in the eastern regions, while it's sending heavy equipment and mobilized troops into the Luhansk region. After almost a year of fighting in Ukraine, Russia is already tasting its own medicine. It now seems that this war is proving to be a military failure for the country. Russia, which has one of the largest forces in the world, is estimated to have lost nearly 40% of its pre-war fleet of tanks. And with that, the overall loss for some of the key tanks used in combat for Moscow has risen to as much as 50%. However, reports by the think tank International Institute of Strategic Studies suggests it still has sizable Cold War era stocks. In contrast, the think tank reported that Ukraine's tank numbers have likely increased thanks to its capture of Soviet era tanks along with the ones that it received from its Western allies. Meanwhile, Russia has said that it's investing heavily on new generation weapons. Moscow claims it has used hypersonic missiles in Ukraine and also state-of-the-art armored vehicles and aircraft. However, there is no confirmation on it. Moscow regularly displays these weapons in parades and exercises. And in some more news from the Russian side, if reports are to be believed, Kremlin is said to be pushing back against private army and curbing the influence of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner mercenary group. The Wagner boss has admitted that his mercenary group is facing difficulties in Ukraine. He has also said that the group will soon decrease in size amidst growing evidence that his political influence in the Kremlin is waning. Wagner, largely made up of convicts, had last month captured the Ukrainian town of Soledar, or claimed to. The group has also been at the forefront in the months-long fight to seize neighboring Bakhmut. Away from Ukraine, climate change pangs are surely hurting New Zealand hard. The country is seemingly stuck in a loop of cyclones and storms. This after a 6.1 magnitude earthquake also shook the already flood-ravaged island nation. Rescue operations have not even concluded after Cyclone Gabrielle, and now fresh storm warnings have been issued. The third in 3 weeks. Around 10 people have been killed so far already, and Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has warned of more fatalities in the coming days amidst a national emergency that is in place. This even as a think tank reports that the world is at the risk of a climate doom loop. It's only the third national emergency ever to be declared in New Zealand's history. Cleanup and recovery efforts are still underway after a devastating set of days of extensive flooding, landslides, and damage to homes and orchards. The cyclone struck the country's north and has brought more destruction than any other weather event in decades. Along with rescues, the government is prioritizing restoration of power and telecommunication lines, as well as delivering food, water, and medicine wherever needed. Even as international aid trickles in, Prime Minister Hipkins asked New Zealanders to prepare for more fatalities.
Tragically, police confirm that the number of fatalities caused by the cyclone currently stands at 5. There are still people for whom the police hold grave concerns, and we do need to be prepared for the likelihood that there will be more fatalities. There have been various offers of support from international partners and Australia in particular, and I can confirm that NEMA has accepted an agency-to-agency offer from Australia for emergency response support and expertise.
New Zealand's largest city, Auckland, was swamped 2 weeks ago by a record-breaking storm that killed 4 people. But even as these doom loops of climate change grip New Zealand, an international think tank has warned that the entire world is at risk, not just the island nation. The report by the Institute for Public Policy Research says that simply coping with escalating impacts of the climate crisis may lead the focus away from efforts of bringing down carbon emissions, rendering the situation even worse. Whether keeping the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the international standard, is still possible or not is a debate for another day. However, with the recent snowstorms and floods in the US and Canada, the snowstorm in Japan, the floods in Pakistan and Europe, the melting of glaciers here in the Himalayas, it surely is a debate that needs to happen sooner than later. Now, first, it was New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, and now it's Scotland's Nicola Sturgeon, both heads of their respective countries who have suddenly quit. Scottish leader Nicola Sturgeon, the face of her country's independence movement for 8 years, called it a decision coming from a place of duty and of love. Sturgeon made the announcement during a news conference at her official residence in Edinburgh, saying that part of serving well is knowing when to make way for someone else.
I'm not expecting violins here, but I am a human being as well as a politician. When I entered government in 2007, my niece and youngest nephew were babies, just months old. As I stepped down, they are about to celebrate their 17th birthdays. Now that I think about it, that's exactly the age to be horrified at the thought of your auntie suddenly having more time for you. My point is this: giving absolutely everything of yourself to this job is the only way to do it.
52-year-old Nicola Sturgeon has led Scotland since the year 2014, when the Scots narrowly voted to remain part of the United Kingdom. While the referendum was billed as a once-in-a-generation decision on independence, Sturgeon and her Scottish National Party have now pushed for a new vote. With Britain's exit from the European Union, Sturgeon and her party demanded a re-vote on the independence referendum for Scotland. However, the UK government has refused to allow a second referendum. Sturgeon has publicly declared that she would make the next Scottish Parliament election a de facto referendum on independence, something that some members of her own party have been critical of. The party is set to hold a strategy conference next month. Sturgeon admitted that she cannot in good conscience ask her party to support her judgments if she could not see them through herself. The resignation announcement caught political observers by surprise amidst her staunch support for not just Scotland's independence. Sturgeon's resignation came at a time when she was fighting the backlash against an important law that she is backing, a legislation that would make it easier for people in Scotland to legally change their genders. Hailed as a landmark by transgender rights activists, the bill will allow people aged 16 or older in Scotland to change the gender designations on identity documents by self-declaration, removing the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. While the Scottish Parliament approved the legislation, it has been blocked by the British government because it would present problems for authorities in other parts of the United Kingdom where a medical diagnosis is needed before individuals can transition for legal purposes.
I know it might seem sudden, but I have been wrestling with it, albeit with oscillating levels of intensity for some weeks. Essentially, I've been trying to answer 2 questions. Is carrying on right for me? And more importantly, is me carrying on right for the country, for my party, and for the independence cause I have devoted my life to? I understand why some will automatically answer yes to that second question. But in truth, I have been having to work harder in recent times to convince myself that the answer to either of them, when examined deeply, is yes. And I've reached the difficult conclusion that it's not.
Both Ardern and Sturgeon quoted the same reason for their sudden shock exit. They're tired exhausted, and don't have the energy for it anymore. Both women just being human, prompting the question, are they just being honest? Unlike men leaders around the world who are too stifled to admit to it. Moving on. A 1,100-year-old Hebrew Bible. It's called the Codex Sasson and is said to be auctioned off by Sotheby's in New York. It's believed to be the most valuable document to be ever auctioned, and it could end up going for as much as $50 million. The Codex Sasson is one of the oldest and most complete Hebrew Bibles ever discovered in human history. It's said to have been written in late 9th century to early 10th century in the land of Syria and Israel. And it's a critical link between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Bibles of today. The Codex Sasson consists of 24 books, which marks the foundation of Judaism as well as Christianity. The name Codex Sasson comes from its previous owner, David Solomon Sasson, who assembled the most significant private collection of Jewish artifacts and Hebrew manuscripts in the world. And finally, designer duo Badgley Mischka served a spectra of glam on the closing day of the New York Fashion Week 2023. The duo wrapped up the Fashion Week with glitzy evening wear with floral patterns and bow frills for the Fall 2023 collection. We leave you with that. Thank you so much for watching. Keep it with News 9 Plus.